So I've been getting a lot of requests to make a domination multiplayer guide. So here you go, starting with the Warriors of Chaos, because despite their rather crazy roster, they only got so many viable units. I'd say this is actually the meta most viable roster for Warriors of Chaos, which makes up less than 50% of the roster, but sometimes it'd be like that. You'll notice I only have one Lord here, and that's because, guess what? Archaon's the only one that's actually good here. 94 speed is ludicrous, so he can avoid any fight he wants. And he's actually better statted than Kolek. So if you want someone that can deal damage, probably go for Archaon. Obviously, Kolek will do better in some situations, but like the speed, the size difference, the shielded, the higher armor, he's just better. Also, he has 10% physical resist, so he's pretty good. Spell-wise, you take Searing Doom, Spirit Leech, Burning Head. One of these spells, otherwise you're wasting a ton of money. And that gets him to about 2,300 if you take the Crown of Command, which will make him your terror-causing piece. And that's very important, because guess what? The rest of the Warriors of Chaos terror roster is really bad. Like, you're not gonna run a giant in domination. Speed is the name of the game. Now, for infantry, you got two options that you're probably gonna mix together. Forsaken are really good. You go for undivided on all of these guys, by the way. And the reason they're really good is because they got 46 speed. A lot of people like Chaos Warriors, but at a higher level, you can dictate exactly which fights your Forsaken get into, which means that generally, most of the time, they're going to be cutting up Marauders or whatever chaff your opponent sends your way, and your opponent can't really do anything about it. Most chaff is 35 speed. Forsaken are a whopping 11 speed faster than that, so they'll be able to catch whatever you want. And generally, you treat them as your line-breaking unit, right? They just cleave through the enemy, and they'll get you through the enemy front line. The opposite of that's going to be your aspiring champions. They're way slower, but they can win almost every fight that you put them in, except for like absolutely expensive, dedicated anti-infantry, which kind of dies to the rest of your army. So aspiring champions, very, very good. Lots of armor, silver shields, lots of HP, and a courage, which also combos with Forsaken's frenzy ability to make sure that they maintain that buff as long as possible. But it wouldn't be an Enticity guide without Cavalry. You got Hellstriders, which are basically the Forsaken of your Cavalry Corps. They do use up your marks, but boy is it worth it, because they got 100 speed and Strider. So they're just way faster than any other cavalry on the battlefield. If they die, it means it's just a skill issue. Not a problem with the Hellstriders, because they, in theory, should never ever get caught. Rot Knights are going to be your aspiring champions of your cavalry corps. Way harder to take down, but most importantly, aside from their overall tankiness, they got terror, which is pretty important when you only have Archaon for terror. Sometimes your battle line is wide enough where you want two terror-causing pieces. Other than that, though, you can't really go wrong with them. Sometimes you can be a little bit more optimal, but they're just so tanky, you can't really screw up with them. So I definitely recommend these guys. But let's be real, most of the time you're taking Marauder Horsemen. Number one, a lot of factions are just going to be unprepared for this many Skirmishers. Between Marauder Horsemen and Horse Masters, you have so much kiting ability that Warriors of Chaos is actually a pretty decent kite faction. The reason you don't take Axe Throwers, by the way, is because they're more expensive. Their Arcs of Fire are really bad, and they have less range. So generally, they end up doing less damage than your Marauder Horsemen, even though they got that sweet, sweet armor piercing. But look, Marauder Horsemen and Horse Masters still have 33% armor piercing damage. So don't think that they're going to be bad firing into, like, I don't know, chosen great weapons or something. Maybe it's not that worth it to shoot like silver shielded Chaos Warriors. But honestly, if you get a flank on them, it's still pretty worth. Marauder Horse Masters have 90 range, which is at the point where you can actually start dodging range attacks pretty consistently with them. And they also have more ammunition. So even though they are more expensive, generally the value they bring back is going to be worth it despite that fairly increased price point. Now, Blood Beasts, they're in a bit of a weird spot right now because they do count as marked, which means that you can't take, 4 Hellstriders and the Rotting Riders and Blood Beast because these already eat up 2 of your mark slots. Instead, for some builds, you may want to go for like 3 Hellstriders and 2 Blood Beasts. That works perfectly fine. They're just a great high mass monstrous unit that does a whack load of damage. And generally, they do well against everything that you throw them against. I will say the roles overlap a little bit hard with the Hellstriders and the Rotting Riders. Like, even if you want to stop a massive single entity, Hellstriders are kind of good enough for that too. But mostly, I'd say it just comes down to preference. If you're having a lot more success with Blood Beasts, just go for them. It'll be fine. Just know that you're probably going to do better with Hellstriders. Now, Hell Cannons, on the other hand, they are a really good up trading tool. You generally are going to be getting value anytime you have a Hell Cannon on the field, because you can desummon it and get 50% of your value back. And the Regiment of Renown is basically more Hell Cannon without taking a second Hell Cannon. It has more ammunition, it'll fire slightly faster, and overall, it's good for its price, but sometimes you don't really want, this much money dumped into Hell Cannons, so you go for the normal one. Both options are great, and they also give a -8 leadership debuff when they hit units. Because they're so accurate, you can get this really consistently, and -8 leadership's kind of huge. It's, I believe, a little bit in between flanking a unit and charging them in the rear. So definitely worth taking, as long as your opponent doesn't have, dedicated anti-artillery pieces. But hey, look, 420 range means you should be able to keep it out of range of even cannons as long as you're controlling it correctly. So, skill issue once again. Anyways, this is the core roster for Warriors of Chaos. I know it looks pretty small, but it does mean that Warriors of Chaos is pretty easy to learn as long as you stick to this. There are a few other options that you can take that I would say are suboptimal in most situations, but occasionally you're gonna find a situation where you want to take them, and that's it's kind of up to you to decide. Most of the time you can actually just avoid these, but if you want to experiment with the roster a little bit. Scylla, Infantry. You have a great single entity to supplement Archaon. You want to take them if you have something really huge you want to take down, or if Archaon's already taken a lot of damage and a Hell Cannon's not going to foot the bill. You got kind of a Mortis Engine AoE damage effect. You got a Rampage, which can be decent against Skirmishers, though the radius is incredibly small. Generally, this can be a lot better if you use it against, let's say, single entities to keep them in the fight, which kind of helps out with the whole fighty business. And I'd kind of avoid the other abilities because, look, if you're taking 2,100 gold single entity, it's starting to get into the point where you're wasting your money. Scylla is honestly a good enough fighter on their own. Marauders, of course, are just generally good as just a chaff clearing unit. I will say, Forsaken generally will do a good amount better for the price. The only thing that they don't have over Marauders is probably capture weight. But the DPS increase going to Forsaken is insane. Like, they do double the damage that Marauders do, especially when you take into account their Frenzy. I guess technically the melee attack is a little bit lower, but aside from that, they're doing a lot more damage. And the armored bonus means that they're going to be tankier a lot of the time too. But sometimes you're going to want Marauders. I'm not going to say they're useless. So sub them out at your own risk. Severed Claw are also really cool. You got your Aspiring Champions that are way higher in damage. That anti-large is insane. So if any large unit decides to take a fight against these guys, it's just gonna die. And that's a useful tool. You don't really have a lot of that on this roster in terms of your infantry. You're going to be using Marauder Horsemen, or maybe you're Rotting Riders instead, but those guys can run into a lot of counters, same with the Hell Cannon. So hey, in the odd situation where you need anti-large infantry, these guys are great. But honestly, that situation doesn't come up very often. This is more than enough anti-large typically. So sub them in rarely. Chaos Trolls, kind of similar to Blood Beasts. They're weaker Blood Beasts, but they do have regeneration. They are cheaper. So if you make use of their regeneration, there's not a lot of terror or fear causing units on the enemy roster, and you really want to have monstrous units to pin down things, or maybe just slow grind against, I don't know, armored infantry. Not that many people are going to be taking that against, your Hell Cannons, your Rotting Riders, and all that. But, you'll notice that this entire top roster doesn't really have a lot of, it would not clear Chaos Warriors exceptionally fast, right? They have a lot of slow trading options against them outside of the Blood Beasts. But you don't always have marks. So take the Chaos Armored Trolls instead. And there you go. That's the entire roster. But yeah, if you want to see more videos like this, it's very low effort for me. So if this series is even mildly successful, then I'll definitely make more. You can comment other factions you want to see me cover. It does actually help a lot when a video gets a lot of comments. So that's the way you can get this video spread to more people.